Now, the program to help you and your family get fit and stay fit with a biblical foundation without a one-size-fits-all plan. It's Faith Family Fitness with your host, Full Armor Sports and national champion coach, Jason Lupo.
Welcome to Faith Family Fitness on 100.7 The Word. For a long time, researchers, psychologists, people have tried to theorize the development of children, youth, adolescents throughout the ages. And there's a ton of different theories of development. And so we're going to touch on some of those throughout this next year. You'll see a lot of information on our website about them as we start publishing them. But today what we're going to talk about is Erickson's theory of psychosocial development. And so Erickson, his theory is 8 stages. It's actually one of the only theories that spans the entire lifetime of an individual. So it goes all the way from birth to death, past the age of 65. And so it's a very comprehensive idea or theory about how psychosocial development works and exists. Now, instead of rushing through all 8 stages, I've decided that we're going to break this up into a couple episodes. So today we're going to talk about stage 3 and stage 4. Stage 1 and stage 2 is essentially birth to about 3 years old. So the first stage is birth to 18 months old. And the second stage is 18 months old to about 3 years old. But we're going to pick it up kind of at stage 3 and go stage 3 and stage 4. We will be publishing some stuff on stage 1 and stage 2 on our website, faithfamilyfit.org. And I'm looking to bring in somebody to interview about stage 1 and stage 2 as they are not my expertise. And so I don't want to step outside the zone of where my expertise lies. I want to kind of stay where my expertise is. And I will try to bring you in a guest that can talk about that in their expertise. So we're going to take a brief time out. When we come back, we're going to talk about Erickson's theory of psychosocial development.
Full Armor Sports Teams has a new facility for after-school youth programs. It's located at 2380 Montebello near North Academy and Union with 2 pools for swim lessons and swim teams, a weight room for powerlifting, conditioning, and more. Full Armor Sports Teams is a Christ-centered and family-oriented organization bringing the youth of Colorado Springs together. For more info on after-school and homeschool programs, go to fullarmorsportsteams.com or call 719-629-SWIM.
Welcome back to Faith Family Fitness on 100.7 The Word. It was 1950 that Erickson released his theory of psychosocial development. That's when it was first published in Childhood and Society journal. Before that time, there had been other somewhat controversial theories of development in a psychological perspective. The most famous being the psychosexual development that was theorized earlier by Freud, which you've probably heard of. And we're not going to talk about that theory today. We're going to essentially talk about a portion of Erickson's theory of psychosocial development and pick up at about 3 to 5 years old, which is stage 3. So all of Erickson's theory involves this competition between a positive, a successful outcome, and what is the negative outcome. And it's labeled as such. And so stage 3 is initiative versus guilt. And so if you think back, if you've ever had kids, or if you've worked with kids, or you've been around kids, in that 3 to 5 year old zone, and what occurs during that age group of 3 to 5 years old is they start to play. And they start to play on their own with other peers. That's when we really start to see this peer involvement in play. And there's a lot of creativity that goes on. And there's a lot of assertion that starts to happen. And that assertion of a kid kind of learning to take control or trying to have control over the game or how it's played, That all starts at a very early age. But sometimes that assertion can be perceived in a very negative fashion, depending upon your parental choice and how you choose to parent your child or how you see your child. But there is some truth to the fact that sometimes that age group can become overly aggressive and assertive. And so that's kind of the age where we start to, see biting or hitting, and we're trying to stop the biting and hitting. But all of this occurs kind of at the same time. And so there's definitely a need for correction. Obviously, if a child is physical with another child, there's definitely a need for correction. But that correction can also lead to a feeling of guilt, which we kind of want to develop that at the same time, but not to a huge sense. So success and failure in this stage is very influential in a child's development beyond that stage. Erickson theorized that success leads to children who feel capable and are able to use initiative or lead. And at the same time, failure can lead to a child feeling guilt and self-doubt, and therefore less likely to lead. And so what we have to do in this stage, what's really important in this stage, is that we find a balance. So when a child takes initiative, if it's met with praise, we boost confidence and we boost initiative. Whereas if a child's initiative is met with criticism, we foster doubt and guilt. And so it's really important to make sure that we're responding in the right way for the situation. And I know that sometimes parents can get stressed out. There's a lot going on. Maybe you have multiple kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the response in terms of how a child shows initiative in any circumstance, our response is critical. And so we have to ask the question, I'm going to ask the question for you to ponder, how do you respond when a child tries to help a parent with a task? When a child tries to help you with a task, they might do it in a horrible fashion. Maybe, they're trying to help load the dishwasher and they've initiated the help on their own and they don't do it the way that you want it done. Well, at 3 to 5 years old, it's more important to praise that child for their initiative. And then when they're not looking, you reorganize the dishwasher and run it. That's a great response to that circumstance. Maybe there's a little bit of teaching and directing, but you want to make sure that teaching and directing does not foster this shame, this doubt, where now that child is scared to help, scared to initiate a task. How do we respond when a child spills a glass? Is it with anger, or then do we create this teaching moment of, hey, this is how we clean this up? All of this is critical to the development of a child's initiative and feelings of guilt and doubt. And the same goes with asking questions. If we have a child that continually asks questions and we meet those questions with frustration or anger, we foster that shame and doubt, rather than meeting those questions with an openness to that child's creativity, their imagination, their will to learn. It's like, I don't remember who said it, but that the story of the dog, if you want to starve a dog, every time he goes near his food bowl, you slap him on the nose. And if you do it over time, and over and over and over, eventually the dog will become fearful of that food bowl. And you can quickly starve a dog. It's the same idea that when we have youth that are growing and learning, if you constantly slap the child on the nose or are frustrated by their initiative, you will find a child that will no longer take initiative, that will no longer lead, that is not assertive in their learning. And so if we want a child to want to learn, we have to be open to their questions as crazy as they are, as many as they may be, at a very young age. So we don't lose that initiative to learn, that initiative to be creative. And so we have to allow for creativity and play, as long as it's, obviously within some bounds, but those bounds should be pretty far stretched. We don't want to correct how a child plays, which I've seen very frequently, that a child is not playing the way that a parent thinks that the child should play. And if it's not hurting another child, let that child's creativity flow. Let them be free to play in a way that expresses and allows them to take initiative. And the second part that's become really big in a modern sense is this ability to allow for a moderate amount of risk. We've gotten to the point in today's society where we have tried to make everything overly safe. We don't want the child to get hurt. And yes, there's credence to a child not getting hurt. But if we constantly tell a kid, no, you can't jump 6 inches off that brick or whatever, in an attempt to keep our child ultra safe, not only are we kind of taking away this initiative and will to play and want to play in an outdoor setting, which will haunt you later in life when you're trying to get your kids off to video games at 12 and 13 years old. And you want them to play outside, but you've crushed that idea of playing outside by this moderation of risk and this risk-adverse nature. And we've already talked on the show plenty of times about how the fact that our limiting play outdoors and this will to want them to be safe does not test the body's proprioceptive nature and our ability to understand where we are in space at a later time frame. And when those children get into sports, they have less body control, they have less proprioception, they have less ability to move. And so, yes, there is an element to where we want our kids to be safe. Obviously, I'm not saying, let your kids jump off a, second story building into a pool, but there should be a allowable amount of risk. Whereas, yes, some playground equipment might be a little bit dangerous. But do we stop them because our risk tolerance is so low that we do not allow our children to discover their own bodies and how they respond in this effort of creating a low-risk environment? Stage 4 of this Erickson's psychosocial development is 5 to 12 years old, in industry versus inferiority. And this is the age where we have this giant immersion into the education system, into the school system, or if you homeschool, into the homeschool system. And the major influential factors in this group is the teachers, the peer groups, social interactions, and other mentors or coaches or youth leaders or leaders at church or pastoral staff. All of these are extremely influential in this stage. And at the end of the day, winning approval is a motivating factor in this stage. From 5 to 12 years old, these kids want to win the approval of those teachers, the peer groups, those pastors, the mentors that are in their lives. They want to win approval from them. And it leads to pride and self-esteem and competence and accomplishment. And if we do this right, successful development leads to a feeling of competence and able to take on new challenges. But there's also this learning to fail component. A child learning to fail is a huge component because not only does it lead to modesty, but it leads to the idea of grit, which the grit research came after, 1950 and Erickson. So we don't necessarily see that. If this were rewritten, I'm pretty sure that we'd be talking a lot about a child's ability to overcome obstacles being a huge component of this age group, because we've seen it as well, which means that we want the children to be challenged. We want them to be able to embrace challenge, to overcome challenge, and to set challenges to where children have to reach for them. And that's that real idea of industry. So I think we've come a long way since 1950, but this is a starting point to a conversation that we could potentially have for the next 5 hours. But a failure at this stage leads to a sense of inferiority. And so there's a huge outcome in this stage. We either have the outcome of industry, a child wanting to be successful, or a child feeling like they cannot reach the same potential as those other children, and they feel inferior to their peers. This is also where that research from Carol Dweck and all of her work in a growth mindset comes in as well, which we had an episode on growth mindset not too long ago. So everything that we choose to do in this zone of 5 to 12 years old is going to impact what happens in a child's development. Just like in stage 3, from 3 to 5 years old, what happens there, how we choose to deal with some of these issues, becomes a contributing factor to their development from 5 to 12. It's a mindset that gets embedded. So the choices that we make in terms of how we coach these individuals, how we treat these individuals, how we deal with the negative behaviors, how we deal with the positive behaviors, impacts a child's will to learn, to succeed, to grow, to lead. And on the inverse, a child's will to disobey, a child's will to not want to learn, a child's will that they feel inferior. And that's a huge, continuum in between, obviously. But we want to create children that want to learn. We want to create children that want to succeed, that want to help. And not help from a fear of punishment, but from a fear of initiative, taking initiative. All of this is very important. And I think we've seen throughout the years, we've seen these arguments about, how do you get children to behave? And you have a wide variety of perspectives on parenting. And are we parenting from a perspective like through Erickson's theories, or are we coaching from Erickson's theory to where we're trying to create athletes or trying to create children that have the initiative to want to learn? Or are we using some negative consequences and a fear of repercussions as a motivating factor? Because if all we do is use repercussions as a motivating factor, we don't truly have that internal drive, that will to lead that we're truly hoping to create. And though if the repercussions and punishment is heavy enough and burdensome enough, then sure, we might get something that looks like a child wants to behave, wants to lead, wants to grow, but really that child's motivating factor is that of avoidance, that of wanting to avoid the repercussions that may exist. I'm not saying that there should not be repercussions. Don't get me wrong. I think repercussions are important. I think that kids need to be held accountable to a standard. But we want those children to be held to that accountability. But the motivating factor should be a child's will to want to learn and improve and grow and develop, not strictly out of an avoidance mechanism to avoid the repercussions. And that line is thin and once again falls on a continuum. So all of these things are super important. I think looking back as I prepared for this show, and we're going to spend an entire episode on stage 5, which is those teenage years, next week. But when I look through Erickson's theory of psychosocial development, we see so many things that occur in the development of the athletes that we work with. And then when you tag team that with the information on late bloomers and kids that maybe are physically behind that of their peers, this stage 4 is so crucial. Because are we going to hold an athlete that is physiologically behind their peers who appear like they're 15 years old physiologically in their bodies? If we hold them to the same standard as that 15-year-old, we're going to create a sense of inferiority. Whereas if we educate those kids that, hey, you will catch up to your peers, they just hit puberty sooner than you did, and you just need to keep doing what you're doing and you'll be just fine. And we build up that self-esteem and we boost their morale, then we create a sense of industry. And even though those kids may be inferior from a physiological perspective at the present moment, they will catch up. And because we haven't beat into them that they are inferior to their peers, please don't do that, parents. If we don't beat that into them, then they will continue to show that drive. They will continue to show industry. And we don't raise kids that then have a feeling or a sense of inferiority because they are not as strong or as capable as their peers. And at the same time, if we don't have that modesty and those kids have not learned to fail that are developmentally ahead, when they get caught up on and they lose a race for the first time because they're no longer the biggest and strongest because they don't have the physiological advantage of puberty, and we haven't got that modesty factor ingrained, then those kids don't know how to deal with that failure, and they have trouble later in life. So this isn't just a this is a very well-rounded approach that we have to look at when it comes to development, and we can't just look at it from one perspective. We have to look at it from all perspectives, physiologically, psychologically, in social settings, all of it. We're going to take a brief time out. When we come back, we're going to wrap up this episode on Stage 3 and Stage 4 of psychosocial development.
Thanks for listening to Faith Family Fitness, a presentation of Full Armor sports teams. Teamwork is at the core of any successful organization. At Full Armor Sports, led by national champion coach Jason Lupo, a Christ-centered approach to sports fundamentals and fitness has earned his company the respect of athletes and their parents. Full Armor Sports is committed to helping youth in our community experience growth through sports and to strive for improvement and excellence. Further, youth compete as individuals coming together with a sense of teamwork, camaraderie, and support for one another. At Full Armor Sports, the reality is achievements, failures, wins, and losses eventually fade away. But the bonds team members form through competition evolve into relationships lasting forever. Learn more at fullarmorsports.com.
Welcome back to Faith Family Fitness on 100.7 The Word. Today's top conversation, Erickson's theory of psychosocial development. We're going to have all this information that we talked about today posted online, faithfamilyfit.org. Obviously, there's a lot of information to digest. We're going to try to put that into some pages that give you great information that also give you realistic ideas and real-life examples of how you can help your children be successful. We find this very important. This is a critical part of our ministry. And this is what we try to do at Full Armor Swim and Sports Teams. If you're in Colorado Springs and are interested in learning more about our sports programs, visit fullarmorswimteam.com. Once again, the website for this show, and you can also find the links to Full Armor at faithfamilyfit.org. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week at 9 a.m. on Saturday.
This has been Faith Family Fitness with Coach Jason Lupo of Full Armor Sports Teams of Colorado Springs. Join him at the same time next week for Faith Family Fitness on The Word 100.7.